Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to cover chapters 12 and 11. Like I told you before, I use various social problems books, and what I've done is I kind of mashed in chapter 12 and chapter 11 from this book, along with some other books too. So there you have it. Once again, for testing purposes, this should be pretty much your go-to for the study guide and as a reference, right? So pretty much everything I'm going to be testing you on for the exam will be pretty much coming from this here, okay? So let's go ahead and just get started. I really do like this chapter. I hope you guys do too. All right. So there we go. The changing nature of work. So we've talked about the Industrial Revolution. You guys know what this is, but the Industrial Revolution is essentially the shift from the rural agrarian world that we left behind, the world of agriculture. So essentially that world order ended because of manufacturing and the Industrial Revolution, and it ushered us into the age of technology, right? And mechanization and mass production. So that was the essentially the Industrial Revolution, right? It was a huge shift for us as a species, right? Pretty much late 1700s throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, give or take, right? But that's the time frame. So within 100 or so years, it was, and I would say a quick change, but the 100 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of things, right? So for the world to shift, like new world order shift, right, within 100 years, that's really quick, okay? And then we have this idea of deindustrialization, right? First, the systematic de-investment in manufacturing and production of production capacities, which we've kind of seen recently, right? We've seen deindustrialization here in the United States. Not that we don't value manufacturing, because we do. It's just not manufacturing here within the country, right? We're going to go ahead and outsource, or should I say offshoring. Okay, well, we'll get into that, right? And then we have this idea of the service revolution, or the service-based revolution, right? So we have the Industrial Revolution, right? Full swing, New World Order, and then we have this kind of stepping back away from manufacturing, deindustrialization, which leads us into the service-based world, or the service-based economy, which is what we're in now, right? And essentially what this is the idea that we're not manufacturing thing anymore, right? I provide a service in the job that I have, with the career that I have, and I'm guessing most of you will provide some sort of service. So our jobs, our careers, our professions are really service-based, okay, not manufacturing, okay? And this is where we're at. And another thing with service-based too, it's about data, technology, or the controlling of information is what drives, or what the service-based revolution is about. But I'll go into more detail, but that's essentially what this chapter with this lecture is going to be, okay? So what forces are transforming the U.S. economy? Well, new technologies, and technology always drives us forward, okay? Good, bad, right, wrong, it just is. Technology keeps moving forward, whether we like it or not. I mean, right now, I'm sure you guys have already heard this, right? AI, artificial technology, right? Chat bots, things like that. It's thrilling, it's exciting, and it's also terrifying all at the same time, right? Because when you think about, what's this going to do for us? How's this going to change our world, right? And we've seen that. Well, some of us have. Some of you may have grown up in a time where you didn't have access to the internet. You didn't have access to smartphones. Like a lot of you might have grown up in a time where that was just kind of normal. And some of you might be a little older and remember a time when there were no cell phones, when you didn't have internet access at home and internet access essentially everywhere, right? Some of you might remember, America Online and dial-up service, and, spotty internet connection, right? Which some people still have, right? But the idea is that you saw the world shift, right? And that was a huge shift. I mean, think about it now, right? Everybody essentially has, an iPhone, right? Or some kind of smartphone, right? which is essentially a supercomputer in our pockets, right? So there's nothing that we don't have access to almost instantly, right? The entire world at our fingertips, right? Like I said, good or bad, right or wrong, it depends, right? How you view it. But new technologies definitely transforming the U.S. economy, right? Then we have globalization, right? The technology has made the world a much smaller place. And then applications, right? Applications help us, um, well, like San Francisco, right? Help us streamline the process or processes, right? Our lives, make our lives easier, make our lives better, right? Is the idea, because there's an app for that, is it, right? Um, but that's kind of what is currently transforming, and it has been transforming our economy, right? And then we have, like I said, the idea of globalization, which kind of already mentioned, right? This idea that, goods, services, movement of people, right? I mean, and it's not just movement of people. I mean, we definitely have movement of people, right? We definitely have the ability for us to travel anywhere in the world. But I mean, that, I don't know, I mean, I'm not knocking actual physical travel, but I mean, physical travel has been around for, 100 some odd years, right? Think about it. The Wright brothers, right? First flight was what, 1912, 1920? I could be wrong, but in that range, right? So think about how quickly that shifted, right? So, the Wright brothers, I think it was in Virginia. I could be wrong, God. They flew in a field a couple hundred feet, and it was, first, flight, first man flight. And then, think about how quickly that technology advanced, right? From flying in a field, a couple hundred feet, right? I mean, we'll say the 1920s. I think it was a little bit earlier than that, but around there. And then the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, you get the idea. How quickly aviation advanced. I mean, by the 60s, I think 50s, late 50s, early 60s, we're already breaking the sound barrier. So, it's leaps and bounds in terms of how fast we were moving as far as technology, right? So as far as globalization, they're going to say movement of people for sure, right? Because we're, traveling, internationally, right? I mean, there's never not a time when there's a plane in the air traveling from one place in the world to another. It's just kind of constant, right? But it's not so much the physical travel, right? That I think makes globalization possible, at least in the way that that we're going to be talking about it. It's going to be technology. It's going to be the internet, right? Instant. I can connect instantly with multiple. I mean, for my computer right now, from your computer, I mean, there isn't a place, as long as they have internet connection, right? As long as they have internet connection, is there a place that we can't connect to, people we can't talk to? Think about goods, services, money. It's all data, right? That's it. It's just controlling data. That's the new world, right? And economic globalization, essentially, that's the goal, right? Essentially, this is a capitalist system, capitalist model, capitalist goal, right? British billionaires rush to world's top tax havens, right? So the ability for us to have a company, right, in one place and then go hide our money somewhere else, it's data. Through technology, what we're doing is we're hiding our money, these billionaires. But you think about it, right? What is the goal for economic globalization? It's to turn a profit, right? So, like I said, it's capitalism. And we rationalize our decisions, and we rationalize our behavior based on the system, right? And what I mean by that is, in a capitalist system, if it makes me money, if I can profit from it, then it is the right decision. So I rationalize what I'm doing by the goal, right? So the ends justify the means. If the goal is to amass and accumulate wealth, whatever I need to do to amass and accumulate that wealth is the right thing to do, or the right decision. So I rationalize whatever I need to do in order to amass and create and amass wealth is essentially the idea, right? So that means if I could be unethical, right? But maybe as long as it's not illegal, I should be fine. And even then, sometimes things that are very illegal, people will do because they rationalize the decision based on the goal, right? If the goal is to make money, whatever I need to do to make that money is the right thing to do, right? So we see a lot of this, people hiding money places. Manufacturing to serving. So service. I talked about this a little bit, right? So essentially the idea is that we left manufacturing behind and we moved into age of service, right? So I provide a service. Like I said before, most of you have jobs or you provide some sort of service. And this is kind of where we're at, right? We're not manufacturing thing anymore for the most part, right? Our economy isn't driven by manufacturing the way that it once was. And this has had some pretty serious, we could say maybe negative impacts, right? In terms of the economy, in terms of middle class, right? 30, 40, 50 years ago, you could work in a machine shop, you could work some kind of blue collar job manufacturing something, right? And work for a power plant or not a power plant, but like an automotive manufacturer, right? And buy a house and raise a family on that blue collar income, right? Is the idea. I mean, my dad is an example of this, right? Not to go into examples and anecdotes, right? But kind of the idea, right? My dad is a machinist. He's been a machinist for over 40 years, right? And he was able to, purchase a home in Orange County, right? On the salary of a machinist, right? He wasn't always a machinist. He started working in machine shop sweeping floors, right? So the idea is that even him sweeping floors and doing just basic tasks and jobs and duties within a machine shop, he was able to purchase a home, right? In Orange County. Is that happening today? Am I wrong? Am I off? Right? If I'm pushing a broom around a machine shop somewhere, am I making enough money to buy a house in Orange County? Yeah. What are we looking at right now? Orange County, 700,000, 800,000 for a single family 3-bedroom house. You're not doing that the machine shop job for the most part, right? And you guys get the idea. You get where I'm going with this, right? The system has changed, right? The game has changed, if you will, right? It's service based. Manufacturing, it's done as far as a means to middle class life. Now, if you want a middle class life, it's got to be some kind of service based job, and even then, for sure, right? It's definitely not guaranteed. There's plenty of service based jobs where you're not even touching a middle class life as far as your income, right? But this is kind of like the option, right, that we're left with, which is really not an option at all. Okay, but in the service-based economy, there's a reliance on the collection, storage, and dissemination of information. Kind of already talked about this, right? My job, service-based. Your job, if you work in data entry, if you work wherever it is you guys work, right? You're probably doing something with the computer. You're probably doing something that's deals with data in some way, shape, or form, right? And that's essentially just what our world has become. Okay, from low skillable service-based jobs to high level service-based jobs, right? But it's all service-based. The problem with this too is also that the service-based economy, it's become easier to exploit workers, right? Take advantage of them. So workers are now suffering from lower wages or experiencing lower wages, less job security, and fewer benefits, right? So we talked about health and coverage in the previous chapter, right? Now we're talking about how jobs impact that, what kind of medical you have access to. And essentially the idea is in this new service-based world as an employer, right? I can go ahead, like I said, the goal is it's capitalism, right? So if my goal is to make money, what I can do is I can kind of maybe trim the fat in a sense, right? So the idea is if I have full-time employees, right? Full-time employees are entitled legally to certain benefits, right? Medical, time off, paid, things like that, time, vacation time and whatnot. Service, if you're part-time, right, you're not entitled to those things. So if you've ever worked a part-time job, right, and your boss comes and kicks you out because if you spend another 3 minutes here, you're going to be over, you're going to be no longer part-time, right? So they'll work you just shy of part-time, and I forget what that is now. Part-time hours, I think it was like 32, 33, 34 hours a week, something on those lines, right? Like 30-ish hours a week is part-time work. But think about it, right? I've done part-time work. I'm sure a lot of you have or currently are part-time workers. Part-time means you're going maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, depending on what the job is, if it's like a service-based, like retail or something like that, right? So the idea is they can get work out of you, right? And you're still driving, you're still commuting, right, to work. I did, to work a couple hours a day, right? Because I was part-time. It wasn't a situation where I could work, 8 hours twice a week and get the hours that I needed. No, it was kind of spread out throughout the week, right? So driving, time away from home, time away from school, time away from other things, right? You're spending the time at this place, but you're not getting back what we should be or what we used to get back, right? We're definitely not getting time off, vacation, and we're definitely not getting benefits. So the idea is they can pretty much work you almost close to 40 hours a week without having to provide you with any of the things they would provide to a full-time employee, which works out great for the employer, right? Because essentially they profit or they benefit off of that, right? We can get same amount of work from you without having to put into, right? In terms of these things, these benefits, right? So we suffer as a result of this, right? And this service-based economy, okay? We have lower wages, less job security, and fewer benefits. And the job security comes in from the idea that this is part-time work, right? I could be replaced very easily. There's no longevity with part-time work, right? I mean, we're not looking at a part-time job and thinking we're going to spend 40 years working part-time, right? You want that full-time job. So those full-time, jobs that existed, right, at one point in time where you're going to spend 20, 30 years. I've done that. I've done the full-time work, and I've worked full-time for 3 companies that folded. So I spent years at companies that have gone out of business, right? So even me trying to stay at those companies and looking for some sort of job security, it didn't exist, right? And we'll get into that. I lost my job because of outsourcing, right? So we'll get into that. And manufacturing now done in low wage economies, right? So the idea is the manufacturing that still is done elsewhere. And if it is done here, it's done in such a way where it doesn't provide you with the ability to live that middle class life, right? That we strive for. Okay, so let's get into these 2 concepts: offshoring and outsourcing, right? So manufacturing now done in low wage economy. So what is a low wage economy? So offshoring essentially when a company moves its production to another country, producing the same products in the same-ish way for the most part, right? But with cheaper labor, lower taxes, and lower benefits to the workers, right? So there's been plenty of companies that have done this, right? GM to invest $1 billion in Mexico for electric vehicle production, angering, UAW members. I remember Harley Davidson, the motorcycle company, sells the idea that it's a part of like American culture, right? If you buy a Harley Davidson, you're buying American, right? But a lot of the manufacturing, a lot of the production of parts, is done in other countries. So it's an American manufactured bike. Well, it's an American bike that's assembled in America from parts that were manufactured in other countries. So they manufacture parts in other countries, ship them to the United States, and then they assemble them here. So the bike was assembled in the US from parts sourced from other countries. And that's what a Harley Davidson is, and a lot of other products too, right? So that's offshoring. And plenty of companies have done this. GM, Ford, I mean, they've all done it, right? That's the whole issue with the Michigan, right? Motor City, we had Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, we had all these companies that were there, right? Manufacturing automobiles, and that manufacturing allowed for the 50s, 60s, and in the 70s this when it started to die out. But like that, kind of those 2 decades where we could argue would be the pinnacle of life in America, right? That kind of like 1950s, nuclear family model that we kind of still strive for. Like that's when that existed, right? When people could go and work for Ford, right, and then buy a house and take care of a family. Those days are done. Doesn't exist anymore. Okay. Now we have outsourcing. So outsourcing, thanks to technology, is an option now for companies. And what companies will do is essentially through technology, take a specific task that was done here stateside, and then outsource it to a service provider in another country, right? So the place I worked for, I did account management, right? So people would have a problem with their account, they would call in, and I would help them with that problem, right? And I was working full time, benefits, all of it. pretty good salary actually. And my job got outsourced because the company's like, well, we can go ahead and outsource this to another country, and not have to pay the workers the same amount of money they were paying me, not to provide benefits, not to provide essentially a lot of what they were providing to me. So this is huge for them, right? And because of technology, or through technology, they're able to do that, right? It doesn't matter that it's me picking up the phone here in the United States. All that matters is that somebody's picking up that phone somewhere and the service is being provided. So what difference does it make to the person who needs the service, right? If I have a problem with my credit card, I have a problem with whatever it has, I call in, I want to speak to somebody. Do I really care if the person is here in the United States or somewhere else? As long as I can call in and be provided with service, get whatever issue I have resolved, that's all I care about. And that's all the company cares about, right? Is being productive, being able to provide that service, right? And then if you can do it in another country at a fraction of the cost. Okay. So that's outsourcing. Some of you may have lost jobs to outsourcing, right? And the example they give here, right, is going to be, research, some medical things, like as far as like X-rays and things like that. Call centers is a big one. Counting, transcribing, transferring, things like that. Essentially what this is, like I said, it's all data, it's all service based. And because technology continues to advance at a high rate, we can do, there's really nothing that we can't do over, here stateside that we can't do overseas, right? In another country. There really isn't. Okay. So there you go. The three roots of outsourcing, we kind of already talked about this, right? Worldwide communications revolution, so essentially technology, right? Internet it's provided us with this option. Supply of qualified workers in English-speaking countries, so Philippines, India, and so on and so forth, right? These countries have the staff that are skilled enough to do that, right? And this is a tough one, right? Because you can argue that it is stealing jobs from Americans, right? But then you got to think about what it does for people in other countries too. I mean, people in other, and this is a whole nother thing too, right? The exploitation of people in other countries. Essentially, these people are being worked for a lot less, right? So they're being exploited as well. But a lot of people in other countries who have these jobs are able to provide for their families, are able to, live at a level that they haven't been able to live before, right? So you push here, and then it kind of comes up over here as far as like the negatives, right? But there are definitely positives too. This is a very complicated issue in terms of, there's no, as far as just simply saying that it's right or wrong to outsource, because you got to think about the people that in other countries that benefit from this. I mean, this is life-changing, right? As it is life-changing for us, right? To not have these jobs here. So it's a tough one, right? Because how could you begrudge somebody, right? Stability. How could you begrudge somebody, a life where they're, able to provide for themselves and their family? Like, it's difficult to begrudge that, right? So it's one thing to kind of think about. And foreign workers are willing to work for 1/5 or less of the salary of U.S. workers, right? Because they can, right? The cost of living in other countries is much less. So they can pay them less and have these individuals still make a decent living and still do well, right? Not always, but, they can. All right. So negative effects of low wage economies on workers, right? So many jobs are exported, which we talked about, causing U.S. workers to lose their jobs. This is a big deal. We've seen this before. Okay. Wages of production workers who still have jobs remain low because of threat of jobs moving overseas. So once again, this is offshoring, right? Offshoring or outsourcing. Workers' unions have been weakened because they too have lost clout. So this is one I'm not going to spend too much time in, but it is important, right? Unions. Unions are important. We still have unions, and just recently too, and I'm surprised by this. You might remember this. Amazon workers trying to unionize. You guys remember that? Amazon employees in the warehouses were trying to unionize because of poor working conditions, wages, and things like that. And you have people that are injuring themselves because there's these quotas, like ridiculous quotas they have to meet as far as like parcels, tracked in a given amount of time, like people not going to the bathroom, people being told they can't go to the bathroom because they can't leave this line of packages that are going through, because if they do, then it messes everything up. Like imagine that, like people literally suffering like adverse medical, essentially they're holding their urine in so long that they're getting bladder infection. Like this isn't, I'm not even making this up. Like people are not like going to the bathroom because they can't. And this is Amazon, right? You wonder how those packages get there so quickly. That's how, right? Because they're working people to death, literally people getting injured, you know, it's a mess. And I'm surprised it didn't go through. But then again, maybe I'm not so surprised, right? Amazon's a very powerful company. Bezos is a very powerful individual, right? One of the richest individuals in the world. So definitely, I guess, an uphill battle, right? Definitely not the easiest place to unionize, but I thought it would have gone through. Okay. And then we have this idea of creative destruction, right? Like I said, once again, technology, right? It's a wonderful thing unless it's, costing you your job. So I'm sure you guys have all seen one of these, right? Little electronic, self checkouts. And most stores I think have them now, right? God, I've even seen them at like CVS and places like that too, right? But think about it, right? This is somebody's job, right? This was a job or a task that somebody was paid for, right? And we can have machines do it. Well, then that's just somebody who doesn't get paid. Now, granted, you can argue that there's people that will have to come and fix this machine, right? And then you can argue there's maybe like one person who kind of oversees these self checkouts, right? But it's still right. It's like 3 or 4 machines. They could be 3 or 4 people. For the company though, this is cost effective. We'll get these machines in here. We'll have one person kind of oversee these machines being run, but for the most part, they kind of work on their own, right? Without minimal to no interference from people, right? They just kind of do their thing, right? They scan, they charge, and they print out receipts. That's it. That's all we need them to do. This is kind of the idea, right? So as the economic structure of capitalism matures, some sectors will lose out while others gain, right? So the idea of like U.S. Steel and a lot of these other companies in the golden age of manufacturing are long gone, right? Apple is the new steel, right? Apple's the new railroad, right? Apple is the new thing until something else comes along, right? So manufacturing, as we know now, is not the dominant service. Dominant industry. It's service based, right? So businesses are more profitable and productive with fewer workers because of outsourcing, because of offshoring, because of automation, right? Makes sense. This is not something that's new. I think we've all understand this idea, right? Was it Amazon? Once again, right? Automation. They have those stores where you can walk in, right? And you can pretty much grab a cart, and every time you throw something in your cart, it just charges your account. You don't even need to deal with the cashier, right? You just or self checkout because you're self checking out in your cart. Right? So you put in your cart, it charges you, right? So some people think it's great. Some people think it's a step in the wrong direction, right? It just depends on you're asking. And this kind of automation leads to what we call or like sunset industries, right? This idea that there's places that used to be useful, right? At one point in time, so it's like as far as a certain type of media, certain types of products, right? They're no longer useful because of technology. Like think about CDs, right? When's the last time you went and bought a CD? I know people are still buy vinyl, right? But the industry has changed, right? So think about it, right? Apple, Apple Music, right? So you just pay a subscription, you can get pretty much anything that you want, right? There's no need to go into the music store anymore. So brick and mortar stores are suffering because of this, right? So think of Amazon, what it's done to bookstores. Think of what it's done to music stores. Think about what it's done to a lot of brick and mortar stores, and not just media in that way, right? But think about all the other things that are difficult to come by now. I mean, is there anything you can't buy on Amazon? I'm sure there's some things, right? But for the most part, you can find it on Amazon and you can have it shipped to you like the next day, right? So that's a very difficult thing to compete with, right? Unless, part of the experiences going and, finding things. Like for some people, like this idea of like instant gratification. I'm old enough where I still enjoy that, right? I like going and, looking for records and looking for music, looking for movies, things like that, right? But, where do you guys go buy DVDs or, even Blu-rays? Like who's going and buying those, right? And it's just kind of a form of media that's just kind of become obsolete, right? It's just now we just stream everything, right? So technology moves us forward, and you can argue this like kind of Darwinian, right? In the sense that if you're no longer useful, then you die, is kind of what it is, and we're seeing a lot of places die because of this, right? Let's see here, the changing nature of jobs and compensation. I kind of talked about this already, right? As far as like contingent workers, but we'll kind of go over into a little bit more detail, right? So a contingent worker is a worker that is part-time, temporary, independent, or independent contractors, right? So the idea is there's no stability, right? And some people argue that, this is preferred. I don't know. I guess it just depends on what you're looking for or how you define, like what your priorities are. But I think the individuals who prefer this are definitely a minority, are definitely an outlier, are definitely not the majority, right? I'd argue most people, especially if you want to buy a house, live a middle class life, right? Like part-time work, oof, difficult. Freelancer, you got to be exceptionally skilled. Outsourced employee, not good. Temp, free agent, consultant, independent contractor, you get the idea, right? The idea is that these individuals in these types of professions, right? There's flexibility in this type of work, right? As far as like making your own hours, things like that. But as far as benefits, any of these getting benefits, think about it, right? Like, a part-time worker, or let's see here, outsource, temp, free agent, consultant, independent contractor. Like think about Uber or a Lyft driver, right? They would qualify. They'd fit into this. Do they have benefits? Do they have time off? Anything like that. So the whole point of those companies, right, is that you have the flexibility to kind of work whenever you want, right? And the company kind of just benefits off the fact that they don't have to pay you, right? This is not the traditional kind of employer contract, right? You're contingent. You're independent from the company in that way, right? They utilize you to provide a service, right? But other than that, that's all they really do. That's all they need from you, right? It's just to drive that car, and that's what a lot of jobs are turning into, right? A lot of us are contingent. Our jobs, our positions within our society it's precarious, right? Any little thing can happen and we lose it, right? How many of you have multiple jobs, right? To make ends meet. And that's a scary place to be, right? I mean, multiple jobs, that wasn't the American dream, right? You work in multiple factories. No, you had one factory job, one job, and that was it. You worked your 40 hours a week and you went home, Monday through Friday. It was a week and you had the weekends off, and that was it. That's how it was done. Those days are long gone, right? For the most part, okay? So precarious workers. Let's see here. And we kind of already talked about this, right? Home sourcing, and we already talked about, I didn't say it, it was home sourcing. Temporary worker, we talked about temp workers. And the thing about temporary workers is the same thing, right? It essentially allows employers to exploit, the worker, right? So I can go ahead and have one full-time worker and pay them benefits and time off and all these things, right? 401k and all these other benefits. Or I can have three, right? Temporary or part-time workers. And I can get the same amount of work done, right? Maybe not the same quality, but depending on what the job is, I'm not really looking for quality. I'm just looking that the job is done, right? So I can get the job done and paying these people much less. So I can get three people, to do the work that, usually I can have one person would do, but I don't have to pay them the same amount. So I get more for essentially less, right? Which is great for the employer, bad for us as the employee, right? Because, well, think about it. This guy right here will have the benefits. These guys here will not. let's see here. I've talked about this already. Benefits and security. I've talked about lower worker compensation, right? Real wages, right? I'm sure from a lot of you that are familiar with this, right? As far as the $15 minimum wage, and there's I think California's at 15 now, right? I think California's at 15. There might be one or two other states that are 15, but for the most part, nationwide, we're definitely not at 15 yet. There's some places are paying way less than that. I think the lowest minimum wage in the country was like $6 an hour, $7 an hour. I forget where it was at. But I couldn't imagine, right? I don't care where you live, $6, $7 an hour. That's just, I don't understand how anybody lives. And think about it, $15 an hour. How does anybody live on 15, right? I'd argue not very well. I mean, if you live in Southern California, you're making $15 an hour, right? 40 hours. Let's say you're lucky enough to work 40 hours a week, right? So full-time, 40 hours a week at $15 an hour, you're barely scraping $2,000. That's not going to cut it for rent. That's not going to cut it for, I mean, you might be able to pay rent, but more than half of your monthly wages are going to go to rent. So they can leave with a couple $100 for everything else. Like, that's just not going to cut it. That's just, we're not living on that. So the idea is that we need real wages, right? Wages that people can live off of. Okay. And the number they're at is 15. 15 is not a real wage. You're not living in Southern California at $15 an hour. And if you are, you're not living well. Was the idea. Forces that depress wages of workers. We talked about this. Union membership, competition from low wage countries, corporations that stay in the US but move their move to states that have low union numbers. Essentially, what we're going to do is, and there's a lot of states that do this, right? Taxes, things like that. Those companies will shift areas or move to different parts of the country because they don't have to pay less taxes. Maybe the state is not friendly towards unions, right? So the company is not afraid of its workers unionizing, therefore creating some sort of resistance to whatever the company's offering as far as wages and compensation, right? Because the union would fight that. So some companies will go ahead and move to places that are friendly towards companies and not unions or workers. Unemployment, I think you guys know what unemployment is. Underemployment, a little bit different, right? Underemployment refers to the employment under less than the optimal conditions regarding pay, skill, or working hours. Essentially, the idea is that you're getting paid less for what your skills are. Essentially, you're being exploited or taken advantage of. Okay. What we do see a lot of this is young, non-college educated, and members of the ethnic or racial minorities have some of the highest underemployment rates. So there you go. Job insecurity. We've talked about this, right? I think you guys get this, what job insecurity is, right? Essentially worrying about whether or not your job's going to be there next year or next month or next week. How long, can you retire in this place? Probably not. I've had multiple different jobs, and that's the idea. Most of us will have multiple jobs throughout our lifetime, right? The idea that we're going to find a job at one place and stay there for the remainder of our lives is very slim. Most people, I believe, change jobs, profession, careers every 10 years, right? And it's not like something similar to what they did. Sometimes it's a completely different job altogether. So that's a problem. The Great Recession and its aftermath. I'm just going to skip the Great Recession. I'm not going to talk about that too much. You guys can kind of read about it. But the Great Recession was essentially what happened in the early to mid 2000s, right? 2008, 2007. The housing market collapsed. So long story short, the government failed to regulate banks. Banks handed out really risky loans to individuals who couldn't pay those loans because, well, they made their money instantly by selling these loans, right? Or selling these loans off to investors, and inflated the value of homes and caused a huge housing bubble that eventually burst and sent us into a recession, right? Housing woes. And some of you, a lot of you might not remember this. Some of you might have been young, a lot younger, maybe kids, right? When this happened, right? But you might remember your parents struggling in the mid 2000, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, kind of the aftermath, right, of this. And it wasn't just here, in other parts of the world too. I mean, it was a huge mess that I argue we still haven't quite bounced back from, right? Personal bankruptcies. I don't think we're going to cover personal bankruptcies. You might know what that is. And the middle class, I picked on quite a bit already. right? Well, the reality is the middle class is shrinking, which we've discussed. Um, the argument is it has been shrinking due to globalization, rising personal debt, unemployment, and the recession of 2007. So the idea is the middle class is shrinking because, well, the jobs that we had, or at least had at one point in time, that allowed us to be middle class are gone. The salaries that allowed us to be middle class are gone, and inflation has gone up, and wages have not risen to meet that. I mean, I think it was the 1970s, 1980s, was the last time where it was as far as inflation and wages were relatively close enough where people could still make a living, right? And pay for these things. But think about it now, right? As far as what we get paid, the people are, fighting for $15 an hour, right? As a living wage, as a real wage, when the average home in Orange County is selling for what, 700,000? Like, there's no way. There's absolutely no way that that's a real wage here, right? So the cost of living here in Southern California, it's not even close as far as what the minimum wage is. All right, what does it mean for families to move down from middle class? Well, essentially what it means is that people that are middle class, or people that grew up in the middle class, won't be able to stay in middle class, and people that are working in blue collar won't be able even to reach it, right? Or it's going to be much more difficult for them to reach. Essentially, the idea is to move up into the middle class is becoming more difficult, and people who were middle class to stay middle class is becoming more difficult. So it's pushing a lot more people down from the middle class. The middle class is shrinking, and those people are getting pushed down into the working class and blue collar classes, right? And this is, a huge issue for us, right? Why is it a huge issue for us? Because, well, that's not the agreement, right? That's not the, I would argue, the deal that we kind of agreed upon. As, like, think about it, right? You're working hard, I'm working hard. I went to college, I'll probably go back to get another degree. You're in college right now trying to get a degree. We're both, all of us are conforming. We're jumping through the hoops, law-abiding, legitimate means. We're working hard to get at least a middle class life, right? None of us are doing all this so we can be working class, right? Nobody's doing all this time and effort so that we can be precarious as far as our stability, right? Or to be not stable in our life. We want at least a life of comfort and stability. That's middle class. So what happens when the middle class shrinks? There is no middle class anymore, or the middle class that does exist is so difficult to get into, or impossible to get into, that that we just say middle class. This is kind of the issue, right? Where we have social problems, right? The middle class is a dangerous class in a sense that it's a class made up of educated individuals. I'm educated, you're educated, right? Eventually, hopefully, you guys will all finish, whatever it is to, earn whatever degrees it is that you are trying to get, and hopefully you guys get the jobs and careers that you want. But think about it, right? We don't get those jobs and careers. What happens? There's an educated class of people, huge educated population of people that are now angry and upset that the middle class that we were promised is no longer available. What happens, right? Chaos, right? Revolts, revolution, right? And essentially a reworking of the system, right? Maybe a new status, removing the status quo and kind of like new world order stuff, right? We need to go and figure out a different system, because the system, the way it is now, how long do you see it maintaining itself? And think about it. California, New York, they're kind of the canary in the coal mine, right? The harbinger of what's to come potentially for the rest of the country. So usually it happens along the coasts, and then it kind of works its way into the middle of the country. So what's happening here and now, we can argue eventually will happen in other places in the country, not just in this country, but other countries as well. Other countries are experiencing the same social problems and issues that we are in terms of the economy and workforce. In other European countries, it's even worse as far as unemployment, right? I think it was Italy, Spain. I I forgot what the percent, it was like 30%, some ridiculous amount of college educated adults are living with their families still, unable to find careers, unable to move out and live on their own, even start their own families, right? So essentially their life trajectory has stalled because they're not able to do that, you know, to move out and do things that, you know, way we argue we should, right? And we're kind of seeing that here too, right? A lot of people with college degrees, you know, that are adults can't maintain a home the way they, you know, they would like to, the life they would like to, right? So that stalls what, you know, life stage stuff, right? We're not able to go out and have families and things like that. I mean, for some of you who may have children already, you might know what I'm talking about, but for people that don't, maybe you guys are at an age now where you think about having a family, but you're not sure if you want to because, well, you're not sure if you can afford it. So how many of you out there want to have families? And one of the things holding you back is, can I afford to have a family? That's what this is, right? With the economy shrinking and wages, you know, not matching inflation, we're not able to do what? Hit the life stages the way that we want to. We can't live a middle-class life. I don't think anybody wants to, you know, and we do it, right? But nobody wants to ideally try to start a family, you know, when they're working class or blue collar, right? We're not here for working class or blue collar. We're here to be middle class. That's what we're jumping through these hoops for, right? And the idea is the way the economy is going, the way the work is going, that's becoming more and more difficult to obtain. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. I covered everything I wanted to cover. If you have any questions, please go ahead and let me know and I'll get back to you. Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.